In this exercise, we'll practice describing data from two categorical variables. Problem says the data below represent the employment status and level of education for a sample of U.S. residents 25 years old or older from November of 2014. We want to investigate whether the two variables are associated. Complete the contingency table by filling in the values of the frequency marginal distribution. This will remove the effect of the other variable when we look just in the margins. To construct the frequency marginal distribution, find the sum of each row or column. And that really is all that's involved in finding that frequency marginal distribution there. For example, for the row of employed, we would add the 10,179 who did not finish high school to the 33,624 who are high school graduates, to the 35,407 who have some college, and finally the 49,534 who have a bachelor's degree or higher. And when we add all of those together, we get a sum of 128,744. And you can keep doing that for all of the rows and all of the columns. I'm going to show you how to do it quickly in GeoGebra. So first we want to go to the spreadsheet. And then you can either type in the data or paste it in if you have it saved elsewhere. And then to find the sum of that first row, select the data that you want to add up and just select sum. And it should put it right where it belongs. Alright, I had to click it twice to get it to work that time. I don't know why. Alright, so we select that column, or row rather, we can tell it to sum that one. And here's the sum for this row. And then you can do the same thing for the columns. So you can select the data you want to sum, and just select sum, and it'll put it below all the way across. So if you don't want to type it into your calculator, here's another way that you can do it. Okay, and then finally I do want the total for that whole table, which should be 208,720. So let's fill that in on our table. Okay, now we have our frequency marginal distribution for our table. The next thing we're going to do in our analysis is we're going to construct relative frequency marginal distributions. And here, what we want to know is out of the total, the 208,720 in our sample, what percentage of them did not finish high school? What percentage of them have some college? What percentage of them are employed? And so on. So all we need to do is take our frequency marginal distribution values and just divide each of those row and column totals by the total in the entire table. So for example, if I take 128,744 and divide it by 208,720, I'll get 0.617, or about 62% of those in our sample were employed. And we can also do this in GeoGebra, or you can just do it with a calculator. I'm going to show you how to do it over in GeoGebra. So here we're just going to treat it like we would some kind of a spreadsheet program, or really like a calculator. I'm just going to put it to the edge of the ones that are there rather than starting a new table. So here I'm going to find, just by hitting the equal sign, and then click the cell you want. In this case F2, I want to divide that using the keyboard here by the total. And there's our 0.617 if we round it, and so on. So I'm going to divide this one by the total, and that's 0.031. And here, these are the ones who are not in the labor force, so that 73,581 divided by 208,720. And then do it similarly for the columns. So our total for that column divided by the total in the whole sample, and the same all the way across. What we should see is that if we added up these column percentages, they should add to 1. And similarly, if we added the frequency marginal distributions, the percentages for the rows, these should add to 1. Let's go enter them over on our table for the frequency marginal distributions. You can use that as a check to see if you've got them correctly and that they should add up to 1 both ways for those relative frequencies. A couple follow-up questions for this one. It says, what proportion of those surveyed had a bachelor's degree or higher? So that's these ones, everybody in that column. So that's the 0.328. What proportion of those surveyed were not in the labor force? So that's the ones in this row. So 0.353. And then what proportion of those surveyed were unemployed? So that's our middle row right here. About 3%. Okay, one more way to look at this data. We're going to construct the conditional distribution of employment status given level of education. So now we're going to say if we knew their level of education, what is the distribution like for employment status? So looking back at our first chart here, we're going to look at the 10,179 people in our survey who did not finish high school, and then divide that by the total who didn't finish high school. So we're looking at the 10,179 employed people who didn't finish high school out of the total number who did not finish high school. And we're going to look to see if these are different across the different levels of education. So in this spot right here, what would go there is 10,179 divided by 24,395. And that proportion is 0.42. And similarly for the rest of that column, so now we're going to divide the 945 who are unemployed by the total for that column, and then the 13,271. So in this spot would be 945 over 24,395, and that is 0.4. And then the last one was 13,271 people who are not in the labor force out of the 24,395 who did not finish high school, and that should be 0.54. And notice again that those should all sum to 1 because we're just figuring out how the proportions are distributed across the employment status given a particular level of education. So I would suggest you pause the video and try and fill out the rest of these columns and then start it again to see if we match. Okay, you're back. So here is the conditional distribution of employment status by level of education for this particular sample data. And then looking at this is when now we can answer the question about whether there is some association between employment status and level of education. So here, if we look across these columns, the different levels of education, does the distribution of employment status change? And one easy way to look at this is you could look at the highest ones in each column. And so yeah, it does seem to be different looking between them. Or you can look at what happens as you move from column to column. These values are not the same, and they're not very close to the same. It looks like the unemployment status seems to be close to the same across all of the different levels. Close enough, hard to tell, but it does look like the employment, the percentage of those who are employed and the percentage who are not in the labor force, seem to be quite different for the different levels of education. So based on that, what we're looking for is just to see if there's a pattern. I would say yes, there's some evidence of association between employment status and level of education, and you can write down your justification for that. It's also helpful to think about what it would look like if there was no association. If there was no association, then the pattern we see here would be basically the same pattern here, and the same pattern here, and the same pattern here. So the pattern you see for one level of education in the distribution across employment status would be the same percentages for each of these different levels of education. That's not what we see here, so we do have evidence of an association.